Well, hey, welcome back to the Parent Path, a parenting podcast designed for the parents of X-Church and beyond, where we dive into the intersection of parenting and faith. I'm your host. My name is Jesse. I am a father of two little boys, husband to my wife, Sarah, and I right now have the great privilege and joy of being the next gen pastor at X-Church. And so if this is your first time listening to the Parent Path, it's just such an honor to have you along for the ride. This is one of my favorite things that I get to do because I love talking about parenting. I'll often say of all the different hats that I get to wear in my life, being a dad is by far my favorite. And so this podcast, we set out to talk about what it is like, or what are the challenges, and how can we all get better at parenting, and specifically parenting kids that we are hoping are going to grow up to come to know and love Jesus and model him with their lives. And so today's topic is one that I have been excited to talk about since the beginning of the Parent Path. Today we're going to talk about discipline, everybody's favorite thing in the world, right? Discipline. And discipline, especially if you are a modern day parent, is talked about a whole lot. And if you're on social media, Facebook, Instagram, there's quite literally about 1 billion different experts telling us how we should parent, how the way parents in the past did it all wrong, how current parents are getting it wrong, how if you say this, then it's wrong. If you say this, if you give timeouts, if you spank, if you don't do anything. It seems like everything under the umbrella of parenting, everyone's got their 2 cents to throw in. So as a parent, trying to navigate that and do your best and try to find some solid information of, hey, discipline is an important part of parenting, obviously. So how can I do it well and make sure that I'm doing it in a way that's healthy, but maybe more important for our conversation, how can I do it in a way that pleases God and in some microscopic way could model how he sort of parents us, right? The Bible refers to him as a father. It actually talks about how God disciplines his children. And so how can we kind of adopt God's mindset when it comes to disciplining our kids? So let's talk about some of the extremes, right, of parenting and discipline right now in the modern world. Call it this, maybe the old school style of parenting. The parents that are strict, are harsh, are the maybe yellers, are the boss around, point your fingers, I'll give you something to cry about, right? That style of parent is maybe one of the extremes, let's say, right? The other extreme is much more popular in today's world or with younger parents today, and that is the touchy-feely, delicate, soft type of parent. I saw an Instagram reel, you maybe have seen this one as well, it's a joke, it's not real, it's a little skit, but it's a mom whose toddler is pretending to have a tantrum in a Costco, and she just lays down on the floor with him like, it's okay. I honor and validate the feelings you're feeling, as he's screaming and throwing, cheese puffs all over the place, right? That was a skit, but that gives us a picture that there is a style of parenting that is, let's call it permissive. Permissive parenting. That is maybe the overemphasis on emotional connection, while maybe letting some of the authority part of our role as parents slip through the cracks. And so permissive parenting, let's define it as focusing solely on connection and relationship. Boundaries will be bent and broken out of a desire to maintain connection. That's what a permissive parent looks like. And so some statements to maybe help you and myself figure out on this spectrum of permissive to maybe stricter, where do I fall? Some statements that a permissive parent might say sound like this: I really value peace in my home, so I often avoid conflict, or I'll just let things go simply to keep the calm. Or they might say, I sometimes will change or remove entirely a consequence that I've set, or I've threatened at least, if my child seems upset enough in the moment. Let's define the other end of the spectrum, and I'll call that an authoritarian parent. This is the bossy, hovering over kind of parent. They focus solely on the rules. Boundaries are the final word. Parents expect to be listened to. They expect to be obeyed. They expect to be respected. They expect obedience and respect above all things. And so if that means raising their voice or dishing out consequences fast, so be it. That might be something that an authoritarian parent might say. I expect to be obeyed. So when I say something, they better do it. Or they might say something like, I don't always explain the why behind a rule. I just want it to be followed when I say it, right? So those are kind of the extremes. Now, I don't think that's probably any of our goals, but I can imagine that we probably lean one direction or the other. Maybe you lean towards being a little more chill, or you let things slide, or not making things a super big deal. Whether that is your heart or whether that is, I'm just exhausted and I just don't have it to give right now. And so, whatever, they're eating chocolate at 9 o'clock at night or whatever, Or maybe you lean towards being more of a controlling parent, which puts you towards the authoritarian side of things. Like, no, I said they're going to do this and I want them to do it, and I want them to do it as soon as I say it. Now, as you can imagine, there are maybe some nuggets of positives with these extremes, but there's a whole lot of negatives to these. Let's talk about them. So with the permissive parent, what you get from this is when you combine relationship without rules, or in other words, relationship without any kind of expectation, what you get is chaos, because the kids are then in charge of the house. They are running the show. If they're unhappy about something, or if they don't want to do something, it is not happening. And what can actually happen on a deeper level is this actually creates a sense of anxiety in children as they develop, because what can happen is a permissive parenting style will often lack the kind of basic structure that kids actually need and thrive under. As much as they seem to hate bedtime and they hate, oh, nope, you can't eat this before this, they need it desperately. And so often a permissive parent will lack that kind of basic structure that kids actually need, and they are going to sense that uneasiness or lack of structure, and it might even create a sense of anxiety. And then on a long-term scale, this can lead children to grow up with the impression that the world revolves around them, because in a sense, in the household, it kind of does. If they're not happy, if they don't want to do something, it's not happening, right? Or if they're upset, then it's a problem, right? And so we don't want our kids to grow up with either of those things. We want our kids to feel important and feel seen and valued, but I don't know about you. I don't want my kids to grow up thinking that the world revolves around them. The other extreme, the authoritarian parent rules without relationship. So in other words, they've got high expectation and not a lot of connection happening in their relationship to their kids. And what you get from that is most often rebellion. As kids grow up in age, they're going to get real sick of living with a drill sergeant. And two things are going to happen in my experience. They're going to become really openly disrespectful to you, and they're going to start pushing back on you really hard, or they're going to get real secretive and get good at hiding how they're going to break your rules. On a deeper level, this could create some perfectionism in kids and actually lead to people-pleasing as an adult, because if they mess up when they're a kid, then things are not right. People are not happy with them. Then the world kind of starts to shake around them. And so it creates an unhealthy sense of perfectionism or people-pleasing. I need to do the right thing all the time. I need to keep all the people around me happy because that's how I grew up. And on an even deeper level, as they grow into adults, it might lead them to believing that love is conditional, because maybe in an authoritarian household, that's how it feels. That, only when I do good is there a good feeling from my parent. When I do bad, then I'm not feeling a whole lot of love from that. So, as we can see, those extremes leave a lot to be desired. And as interesting as it might sound, I actually think that Jesus gives us the best example of how to be a parent. And that's interesting because, of course, in Scripture, Jesus was not a parent. But I actually think who Jesus was perfectly encapsulates what our goal as parents should be when raising our kids. You see, Jesus in John chapter 1, he's described by this very unique phrase. And I think it should be our goal as parents. John chapter 1 describes Jesus as being full of grace and truth. He's full of grace and truth. And that's what we see throughout all of his interactions with people while he's on earth. When he finds somebody who is stuck in sin or has screwed their life up, who is just at rock bottom, he does not throw the book at them. He doesn't say, don't you know better than this? Don't you know that the law forbids this type of behavior and this is exactly why? Because it ends up like this when you make those decisions. No, he met people with grace. He met people with compassion. He saw the person through the behavior. And he saw to what was going on the inside, and he extended grace. He connected first, but then he never bent the boundaries. He never said, you know what, it's fine. I think of the person or the lady who was caught in adultery, when all of the authoritarian priests throw her out and try to shame her and say, Jesus, look what she did, she screwed up, what punishment should we dish out? Jesus has compassion on her. But then he also ends that interaction with her with, go and sin no more. Leave your life of sin. He still holds the expectation while maintaining connection with the individual. And I think that should be our goal as parents. And it's sort of like we're going to merge the positive aspects of the permissive parent and the positive aspects of the authoritarian parent into something that I'm going to call the authoritative parent. Hopefully I can keep those two different. Not authoritarian. This is authoritative. So while permissive parenting has high connection with low expectation, and an authoritarian parent has low connection with high expectation, and authoritative parents has high connection and high expectations. An authoritative parent will say things like this: I try to stay calm and connect with my children before giving consequence or correction. They might say something like, I follow through on boundaries, but I try to do it with kindness and with empathy. See, parents who are authoritative, or in other words, parents who are modeling who Jesus was to their kids, they have two things in common. They have a high responsiveness, or in other words, they are tuned in to what is happening on the inside world of their kids. They are attuned, they are aware, they are empathetic to what is happening in their kids' minds during a moment of misbehavior, during a tantrum, during a super disrespectful back and forth. They can see, they don't ignore the behavior, but there are moments of seeing through that behavior to maybe the deeper issue or the deeper need that's not being met. See, they value connection while also maintaining very high expectations. They set clear boundaries that do not get bent, even if the child is upset or doesn't like it or doesn't agree. They have clear boundaries and they have consistent discipline. And would you believe it if I told you that studies would show that children that are raised in this way tend to be more resilient as they age. They tend to be more emotionally secure, socially competent, and responsible when they are led this way from a young age. Let's talk about the deeper roots of why being an authoritative parent works. Not an authoritarian parent, authoritative. And you may have heard this by now. This conversation has become much more popular lately. But the part of your brain that is responsible for logic and reasoning, or in other words, for our conversation, the part of your brain that can do, I was just told to do something, I don't want to do it, but because I was told by an authority, a person in authority, I will do it anyway. The part of your brain that does that, the prefrontal cortex, develops much slower. It's actually one of the last part of your brain to be fully developed. Doesn't finish developing until you are 25 years old. and it develops much slower than some of the more emotional parts of your brain. Now, I'm not an expert in this, and that's definitely an oversimplification of what's happening, but for our conversation, it gets us where we need to be. And so what psychologists have learned in this whole prefrontal cortex debate, because kids, even though they're not going to be able to articulate this wrestling match that's happening in their head between their prefrontal cortex and more the emotional parts of their brain, they can't articulate it that way, but I think they can feel it. I actually had a talk with a first grader 2-3 months ago, and they described this feeling that they have when they get in trouble as the bad version of them took over. They were saying, there's like two versions of me in my head. There's the part of me that like does good and knows what's right and wants to do the right thing, but then every once in a while it's like bad me takes over and starts doing stuff that I know is bad, but it's like I can't control it almost. And it was really heartbreaking that this kid was like, oh no, that was bad me that did that. And what that first grader was actually feeling was his prefrontal cortex wrestling for control with the more emotional parts of his brain. It's a normal part of development. And so, which is why the empathetic part and the connection part of our parenting matters, because so often our kids really are doing their best and their brain is wrestling with itself to try and do the right thing. And so when parents lead with warmth and structure, in other words, connection, relationship, and expectation, it actually creates a type of co-regulation. In other words, it helps kids build their self-control through a modeled calmness and consistent limits. It helps them build self-control when we maintain calmness, when we have connection, when we have relationship, but we don't budge on our expectation. We don't bend the boundary that we have set just because it makes them upset. It is a modeled calmness and consistent limits. And what happens over time when this is done is that external structure starts to become their internal compass as they grow, which is exactly what we want for their life and for their faith. And I actually think there's an even deeper reason why this style of parenting works best for little humans. And that reason is it is a picture of the gospel. In Ephesians 2, verses 8 through 10, it says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not from yourselves. It is a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." What do we see in these three verses right here? We see connection and expectation. We see empathy and a high calling. Because Paul here says that it's by grace that you are saved. God extends grace and mercy to us every single day. That is how we come into relationship with Him. That is how we find our salvation. It's not by doing good deeds. It's not by performing. It is by grace that you have been saved. But then Paul says, but that grace has expectations with it. That's not just, hey, you have grace and you can keep on doing whatever you want. It says, no, that grace is to help you reach your full potential because you are God's handiwork. You are created in Christ Jesus to do good works. The gospel is a merging of undeserved grace with a high purpose. And I think that's what we should try to embody in our parenting. And one of the ways we do this in our household is after there has been a moment of discipline, or there's been some tempers flared, or there's been some punishment dished out, or boundaries had to be held. Once emotions are calm, once connection has been reestablished, once there's no more tears, there's no more frustration on the part of the child or the parent, once everybody's back to baseline, there's a phrase that we've been using for the past couple years, and please feel free to steal it or to modify it and use it in a way that would work well in your household. But one of the things we say is, we know that you can be good, and so that's what we expect. We know you can be good, and so that's what we we try to anchor our disciplinary moments in a higher calling or into speaking into the potential that we see that they are good. God made them to do good works, and that is what we're trying to help them do. We love them enough to have a high standard for them. We try not to use phrases like, you ought to know better, you should do better than this by now, you're older than this, big kids don't behave this way anymore. We try not to shame or use things that speak to their identity. We try to only speak to their identity in as the reason why we have the expectation, if that makes sense. We know God made you to do good works. We know you're a good kid and you can be good. And so that is the expectation that we have for you. But the reality is, all of this is super easy to sit here and talk about in a podcast, or to be sitting in the car when maybe you've just dropped the kids off at the sitter, or they're in bed and you're listening to it. Like, yeah, that sounds great. It is another thing when they have you at the end of your rope because they've been pestering you all day, or you've told them the same thing 37 times, and that whole remain calm and keep the connection thing there and discipline calmly and firmly is not quite as easy as it sounds right now as we're talking about it. And so next month, I'm going to give you a little teaser for what we're going to talk about. Next month, we're going to talk about what to do when you lose your cool. Because every parent, I think, ever is guilty of this, that your kids get the best of you. Your temper gets the best of you. You had a long day at work, or you maybe hadn't had your coffee yet, and you snap, you say something you wish you hadn't, you raise your voice, whatever it is. You do something you wish you hadn't. We're going to talk about what to do when that happens and how we can actually model for our kids what we should do when they mess up by doing that when we mess up. Now, let's talk about what we're about to get into in July in XKIDS. So, last month we were in the series Live It Out. That series actually goes all the way into July as well. What our curriculum does is it puts June and July into one big series together. So it's sort of like the summer topic is this. And so Live It Out for Explorers and Heroes and in Legends is going to continue all the way through July in the summary of this series, in case you need a little recap of what your kids are learning in XKIDS this month. Jesus is the greatest example of what it looks like to love others. Through the way he lived his life, Jesus taught us how to love one another. And when we follow Jesus, God's Spirit helps us to live like Jesus, transforming not only us, but the world around us. We're really trying to encourage kids of all ages to put their faith into practice, to act like Jesus, and to teach them that when we do that, it can change not only us, but other people around us. And so, Explorers and Heroes, some of the stories that we're going to be talking about is when Jesus forgives Peter. We're going to read about Jesus' prayer in John 17 before he goes to the cross. We're going to learn about the story of the Good Samaritan. And we're going to conclude this series with the Great Commission at the end of Matthew, where Jesus tells us to go make disciples of all nations. With the bottom line for our explorers and heroes, the bottom line of what we want them to understand is, I can do what Jesus says. And that, parents, is what we just talked about for ourselves, kind of. Explorers and Heroes, their memory verse is Ephesians 4:22 in the NCV version. Is be kind and loving to each other. And of course, all of that plus more and some conversation starters can be found on the parent resource page of the X Church app. And then in Legends, again, same series, Live It Out, same summary. Their stories are exactly the same. Jesus forgives Peter, Jesus' prayer in John 17 before he goes to the cross, the Good Samaritan, and the Great Commission, with the virtue being live it out. With Jesus, we can help change the world. And their memory verse is different from the younger kids. It's Romans 15:5 in the NIRV version. And that is, our God is a God who strengthens and encourages you. May he give you the same attitude towards one another that Christ Jesus had. And of course, all of this plus some more conversation starters, along with the videos that kids of all ages watch. Every single week of those can be found on the parent resource page on the X Church app. So if maybe you, like my family, are headed on vacation here in a little bit, you can stream church online for you, and you can also head over to the X Church app, and your kids can enjoy their video as well, right from the beach or the mountain or the cruise ship or wherever you happen to be. Well, hey, thank you for joining me for this episode of The Parent Path. And I'll remind you, as I always do, when we parent well today, we make the world a better place tomorrow. When we will embody who Jesus was, be full of grace and truth with our kids today, they're going to grow up and make the world a better place tomorrow. So thank you for doing your work as a parent. Thank you for doing all the unseen things, the thankless things. Keep it up. Keep doing it. You're doing better than you think you are. Thanks for liking, sharing this podcast, and I will see you next month.